This is Linda Vettrus-Nichols, and do I have an amazing woman to introduce you to, Madison Reid. Welcome, Madison.
Hello, everyone. It's lovely to virtually meet you.
I know, right? Oh, Madison, you have the coolest story of transformation. I had so much fun chatting with you about that. Would you share that with everybody?
Yeah, of course. So I would say that something that I find really important, just as a journeying process for everyone, is the idea of knowing yourself. If you don't know yourself, it's impossible. Maybe it's not impossible. Maybe you luck out. But I find that it's very difficult to know, A, what makes you happy, B, when you have what makes you happy, and C, when you should be, or maybe not should, let's not say should.
Let's not should on anybody,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. But when there's the opportunity for you to move forward into further happiness versus when maybe your own mental limitations are holding you back.
Right.
So for me, I found that I was very grateful for my upbringing because I got to see the ways in which not knowing yourself often translates to a lot of conflict between parents, siblings, all of that different realm.
Right.
When you don't know yourself, it's impossible to be able to respond with and meet the other person where they are, because all you can see is through your own lens.
Right.
But once you've identified that, you can say, if you're about to be triggered into something, you can see that lens and be like, oh, let's just flip that up. Oh, that's not what they need right now. That's what I would have needed. That's good to know. Let me focus on what they need. And then hopefully you're in healthy relationships that want to do the same for you, not necessarily making it one-sided.
Right.
Yeah.
So what did that look like in your life?
Yeah, for me, I found that both my siblings, they struggled with ADD and whatnot. And so there was just a lot of emotions that were running high, but not necessarily the words to articulate or understand it. And that led to a lot of frustration through all members of the family, just because at a certain point, there's so much yelling and I just want some quiet, please. And you understand that the other person's in pain, but they don't know what to do about it. And they don't necessarily, being younger, have a handle on it.
Right.
You being me, you might also be going through your own thing. So it's not necessarily a fair situation to be put in, but it still requires you to think through what might be the best options for everybody to heal, instead of just shutting down on one person and boosting yourself.
Right.
So I would say that having the experience of living with people who had a lot of emotion, but didn't necessarily, through brain chemistry or through deep emotional wound, they didn't necessarily have a handle on it. And you can't change that situation. That's just a process of moving through it, different medications, different attempts, different therapeutic remedies. But at a certain point, it's just, this is the circumstance. So how do you deal with it? How do you make sure that you're not offloading your frustration, but rather keeping the peace with yourself and trying not to add further damage?
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's heavy duty, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So when you give advice, what does that mean for you?
Advice is very tricky, isn't it? You wish there was a rule of thumb for everything. It would be nice if we could know exactly the right thing to do in every situation to get to the end goal that we desire.
Yeah.
But the world's a crazy place if 2020 hasn't taught us anything. So I found that advice, there's so many different things that go through my mind. One, it's important to know yourself, because otherwise the advice you give will only be healing your own self. Like, it'll only be for you. It's not necessarily going to meet the other person where they are, or see the context that they're in, the pains that they are not valuing, but that are hitting them the most. So that's the first thing, is knowing yourself. Then I would kind of move into, okay, what matters to this other person? Are they in a place right now where they actually want the fix? Do they just want to be heard? Do they just want to wallowing? I think it's important just for a little bit. When it goes too long, okay. But you need to appreciate this wasn't fair for it to happen to me. And then you can move into, okay, but how did I choose this situation and where am I accountable?
You need both. And say, thank you.
Yeah. If you don't let the ego have its say, then it just keeps the wall up and you never get through it the whole time. You just end up stuck there on the other side.
Yeah, and you know what I've discovered is that, it also goes over and recruits the pain body, which is like all the pain from the past. So like if that wasn't enough that it's screaming about, it just adds on until you're in fetal position, bawling your eyes out.
Oh my God. And the longer it goes unchecked, the more forgotten it becomes, where it still lives and it builds, like you said, it compounds with all these little things adding up. But it becomes so difficult to trace that thread back, where it's like, yeah, I was irritated about this person who cut me off in line the other day. And then it takes an hour to work back to, oh, because I was taught as a child that it's important to, like, this is a symbol of respect. This is a symbol of fairness. So when you do that, you're disrespecting every single person in the line and putting yourself beyond. So it takes a long time to figure out where that thread kind of starts from.
For sure. Yeah. Like what really triggered me? Like, is it really this person or is it like my upbringing? I love it. Very cool. Oops, my little arrows. Let's go on. Okay. So giving advice, ask why, where, what? Okay. So what do you feel is important about the ask? What do you think on that subject alone, not getting into these bullets yet?
Yeah. Just on the ask in terms of asking for advice?
Yeah. So like how does the ask help us, right? Thinking through personally, asking ourselves about before we give advice, right? Why? So
this is what we ask ourselves.
Yeah. So why stop and ask yourself these questions? Why do you think that ask is so important? Or have you gotten tripped up by not checking in with yourself?
I think that it's important to ask why, where, and what, because otherwise you're not tapped into specific advice. It has nothing necessarily, you might get lucky, it might have something to do with it. But if you don't actually know what problem or question your advice is answering, if you don't know where you're coming up with your response, because maybe it's more about you than about them. And if you don't know, if you don't know yourself enough to know how this might strengthen or weaken your ego, then your advice probably is going to lead to more tension between you and the party asking for it, because you're not hearing them. And usually when we ask for advice, it's because we are hurting, not because we want the fix, but we use the want for the fix in order to address, like, this was unfair and I don't feel good. Can you empathize with me? And then maybe we can gently move towards the solution. If you jump through all of that specific understanding, you get that thing where people start saying, you're right. And I think it was in a book by Chris Voss, who was a CIA, or what was it, FBI profiler, dealt with hostage negotiations. And he was like, the most dangerous thing is when you hear someone say, you're right. It means they've completely checked out. They're no longer in their emotions. They're no longer in their context. They're hearing the logic and they're saying, you're right. But you've lost them once they listen to logic. Because you're not answering their feelings. You're answering the words that they're using to describe the problem, which are often not connected.
Yeah. Which is the opposite of what I do, is connect soul to soul. And people are like, you're right. And I was like, yeah, because I'm just soul talking.
Exactly.
It's like a complete opposite. That's interesting. Very fascinating.
Well, Chris would love, well, I don't know him, but I feel like he would really enjoy some of what you do, because it gets people back into their feeling. And that's where you can actually kind of be able to work with negotiation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, when people are in trauma or in like a stressful situation like that, they leave their bodies, so You're not even talking to the real person then.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so checking in with yourself as to like, why are you even going to give advice? So we've been sort of talking about when someone's asking for advice, but let's flip it back to whether someone's asked you to give it or not, right? Because advice that isn't even asked for is very disrespectful. And like, we don't stop to think about that.
Yeah.
You're actually disrespecting someone. You're raping them. Like, they didn't ask for it. What's rape? You're getting what you didn't ask for. Somebody is forcing something on you that you didn't ask for. So yeah, it's a really icky feeling when you say something and someone just gives you advice, right? Or in grief situations, you're grieving and or someone just died and is like, well, at least you're this is, you know, and trying to make you feel better, and they're giving you all this advice that certainly wasn't asked for, when you're just trying to process through all those levels of grief, because you know, there's all these stages. The first stage is like denial, right?
Yeah.
So, very cool. Okay, so when you tap in to, you're about to give advice and you check in with yourself, like, why are you giving it? So what are some tips there, or some thoughts you have as to like how you even check in with yourself? Some of those examples that I gave earlier.
Yeah. So, well, it's fascinating, just before we go on to that, what you mentioned about like denial. I think you somewhat, whether it's a conscious learning about this or subconscious intuition, there needs to be some understanding of the different stages that people are in when they come to you for advice, because that can help pivot. Oh, this is the sort of advice. This is the sort of advice. So that was just an interesting point that you mentioned. And I felt like that would be good to touch on, at least briefly right now.
Go for it.
But in terms of being able to know yourself, I mean, number one thing is journaling, right? It's just the best way. You get stuck after one sentence, then you write about how furious it is to be doing this, and you just start unraveling like, oh, so I get really irritated when results aren't fast, and I am not patient when it comes to things that I don't see a tangible product at the end game of this for. Like, it just wouldn't make sense for me to waste my energies this way. Journaling, I think, is a great way to actually understand yourself, especially in the context of your day-to-day actions. Right. So I think that's the first thing, Linda, is looking at your day and saying, this bugged me. Does it need to? Why? Why did it do that? Was that me, or was it something that, you know, I stand by this, I was not happy when this happened, it was not fair, and now we can move through it? Or was this maybe me getting up my own, about it, and not necessarily seeing the possible context for this other person? Maybe they cut you off in traffic because they were rushing to the hospital. Maybe they, I don't know, cut in line because, not that it's okay, but because they needed to get that coffee for their boss who was going to fire them if they didn't. We don't know. So it's balancing that.
And it's just the setup for the ability to let go. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And both of those sides come to it, whether it's you feel justified and you're okay with the feeling that you're having versus you realize that this was more about you. Both of them will lead to the letting go process, but you have to know where you're at before.
Yeah. Cool beans. All right. So why are you giving it? Like, you have great examples of like checking in, and why would I be giving this advice at this point to somebody else, right? Whether they've asked or not, just like this advice comes up for you to give, and you're like, wait a minute, why am I even going to give this? Like, how is it going to help this person or whatever? You have some scenarios there?
Yeah. So if we're looking at like why you're giving this advice in the moment, let's say somebody doesn't even ask for advice. Let's say you have a best friend. Remember, this is 2020 and we're moving past beauty standards. We know that they still affect us, but we're trying to move past them. I'm going to use this as an example. Let's say you have a friend that just feels really down about the fact that like, I just can't wear this dress. I can't wear it because I can't wear it. And they don't even get to the because why.
Okay.
To me, that might demonstrate that there's a block around even recognizing that fat is bad in her mind. It would show me that this person can't even, or doesn't even want to look at the fact that she is scared of being fat, even though it runs her life. Because as soon as she recognizes this, she knows it's 2020. She knows that being fat doesn't mean you're ugly, and yet she still feels that. So that would be something that I think a lot of people might skip past, because it's very popular in our culture to be like, oh my God, you're not fat. That's insane. Oh my God, you're beautiful. What? And it's like, that is one type of support. Yes. And I think everybody needs that type of love, validation, overwhelming compassion at different points in their journey. That can also be an enabling factor for people who don't want to necessarily solve their issues with the concept of being overweight, but also rely on you to tell them that they're beautiful, rely on you to provide that validation. So what I find often is like that sort of advice that misses the mark, because it's more about you being a good friend and making your friend feel okay, not necessarily giving them the support that would move them beyond the fear.
So would it become, you become curious and doing the sort of the drill down to, because you said the person didn't even finish, you know, the why of it, drilling down to what is really bothering them about that dress? Or okay,
I would say distancing yourself from the immediate fix and instead working through, well, tell me more. Why do you think that is? What? I'd like to hear more.
You think
I don't
it's
know
the
about
color?
that.
Do you think it's the texture? Like,
exactly. Let them answer it.
Feel good.
Yeah, because the thing is, as soon as you answer it, it's wall up. But if you, not with a sense of knowing, like, well, is it this? Because that'll shut somebody down right away.
Sure, just being there to process with them.
Yeah. Even if
it.
you know the answer, just being like,
especially if you know the answer.
But exactly what you were saying, just being like, oh, well, what do you think that is? I don't know, because then they can take charge of the information. They can take charge of knowing themselves without the fear that you might know them better, which often drives the need for advice, is that somebody else has the answer and you don't. So when you're able to guide somebody into finding their own answer, that not only kind of breaks down the fat is ugly. Oh, now that I've said that, that does kind of seem a little crazy, doesn't it? Like once you say it and it's not led by someone else, you're like, oh, well, I just said that in front of you, and okay, well, at least I didn't have to prove anything or walk anything back.
Yeah.
It's in creating a safe space for someone to discover about themselves, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes me to this gal who, after she had her baby, and it was, you know, like her husband was trying to figure out like why the baby, you know, or bringing fact to her, like bringing a problem to her about the baby, and she would just say, so what are your thoughts? You know, like, what do you think might be causing it? You know, and she had more experience in babysat or whatever, so she probably had some of the answers. And she's a mom, you know, she's got the whole intuition. She was really careful to empower her husband, and the two of them put thoughts out in the center on the table, if you will, and then sort of shift through, and then together make a decision about what might be going on, and then together make a decision of like how to tackle that one, and then experiment and see what happens. And babies change all the time. You know, it's, you to stay like even like one nose length ahead is with kids in general is usually impossible. It's a big science experiment that changes all the time. So
I definitely think a huge undervalued gift is the gift of taking a breath. Just hold up a second, you know, wait one moment before you just let whatever's about to tumble out of your mouth happen. It's just, whoop, where's this coming from? Okay, now with full intentionality, I can drive this sentence forward.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Carefully.
just make sure you're fully in that moment instead of thinking about something else, rattling something off. Because the person who's asking or didn't ask for your advice, they could be in a very delicate stage where what you say could be very impactful, just like with children, where every single thing, no matter what you think of it, has a huge impact just developmentally.
Yeah.
So it's important to just check yourself, be like, oh, there's some, I don't want to say fragile because that has bad connotations, but this moment is a bit precarious. So maybe I should shift out of me for a second because it's fun to be with me. We have best friends, we have family who you're just like, this is me. I'm being mean. Now I'm being nice. Now I'm being this. And it feels nice to be in your impulse. I know. Unconditional love, right?
Yeah.
But it feels good to be completely in your impulses. But maybe when advice is happening, that might not be the time to be in your impulses. Although certainly listen to your intuition. That I'm not saying cancel that out.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So just checking in, like, why are you giving it, and thinking about where it's coming from for you. Is there a little scenario that you can think of where it was like you really checked in where it was coming from and realized something? Do you have anything on the tip of your tongue on that aspect coming from you and your experiences?
Yeah. So having already, like, I think everybody has the experience of a friend who is playing for compliments because they're insecure about how they look. So let's skip past that one because I think most of us have been there, if not just for ourselves. I think we all have had insecurities about ourselves. But I would say one that comes to mind is with my mom, actually. And she was very nervous about going back into acting. When I left for college, she had trained to be an actor, but she kind of went into the stay-at-home life. And she always, without expressing it, was like, oh no, I could never be an actor. Like, she'd bring up why she couldn't be it.
Right.
Which is a huge indication to me that you're trying to convince that that path was never an alternative. It's helping to shut down the hope and the regret and the disappointment of not choosing that path. But in doing that, it also prevents this understanding of like, oh, it is still possible. I'm so busy trying to shut down this previous hurt that I'm not even seeing that I could actually still get somewhere that I want to be. But that's too painful. So while I started, and it took some readjusting, because I would hear all of this like, oh, it would be interesting to go into voiceover, but I just don't know. I'm too old. I'm too this. I'm too that. I'm too this. I'm too that. And while for the beginning, I started with, that's not true. You like a lot of support. You know that that's not the case. Like, acting is the one world, maybe the only world in which you literally need everyone. You need everyone. You can't fake it. You have to have everyone.
Yeah.
And so if we move beyond that, I was in this supporting phase. And at a certain point, I just realized, oh, this is enabling. This is about
interesting.
I was just like,
enabling.
Exactly. And it was like, I understood that she needed that support, that it's not as though that wasn't valuable, but she was now living through it instead of moving on to the next step of, okay, I have a trust. I trust the base that I'm going to leap from.
Sure.
I can trust that this base will hold me. And now I can take a step out. Okay, run back. Take 2 steps out, run back. You know, it's being able to trust that. And so at a certain point, I realized, okay, this isn't doing it. So I kind of got a little harsh. I was like, these are all BS. You're saying this, it doesn't mean that. You're saying this, it doesn't mean that. I'm not going to enable you anymore. If you would like to move into voiceover, you can. just know that I don't buy any of your excuses, and you don't have to either. But if you want, you can choose to stay, or you can choose to move into something else.
Wow.
And it's fascinating because she's the one who taught me the idea of, which I think goes to show some psychology, the idea of people will only choose to change when the cost of remaining outweighs the cost of changing.
Damn straight.
Yeah. So it's interesting that she knew that, she lived by it, and yet she wasn't actively living by it in all the places that it mattered.
Sure. That's a great example. I love
and
it.
now she's been rocking the voiceover world because I stopped being super nice. Not that I was mean, but I wasn't super nice anymore. Because that was more about me not trying to hurt her than about me helping her get somewhere. And I think that's what I wanted to illuminate with that example.
Yeah. And then the digging deep to realize, like, damn, I'm enabling her.
Yeah.
And then to make that choice, you made a choice so that she was almost like free to make a choice. So that's beautiful too. I love it. And even in coaching, like whatever the coach is going through, it starts showing up in the clients. And when the coach makes their leap, you know, all the clients do too. And it's like wild to watch.
Yeah.
It's so cool. So it's like, where is this being reflected in my life? So if I'm frustrated with a client, it's like, where is this being reflected in my life? I go do my inner work, take my eyes off the client, back to myself. And then like, I hardly have to work with my clients because, you know, it just takes care of itself. I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the idea of like, what are you trying to prove? So do you have like a drill down scenario that you had to like drill down for yourself maybe? And you realize like, oh, you know, I was actually trying to prove such and such, and I didn't even need to give that advice, and I didn't, or I did, and I realized later, oh, I was just trying to prove this. No wonder it didn't work, or whatever. You have something?
Yeah. It's interesting because I tend towards, all right, if I don't know exactly what I can give here, I'm going to move outside the situation and learn more. Like my natural innate way of being is step back and watch, step back and learn, step back and listen. The answer will come. So in terms of what are you trying to prove, I found that I was always so self-aware that I was like, why are you about to say that? If that's not going to help them, then it's about you. Stop talking. So I found that I had a different problem. Although I would say that in terms of an example, what's coming to mind is with siblings, right? Like my sister. I would give advice to show that I was the boss and I was experienced and I knew the way even when she didn't, because I'm 3 years older. So,
and
well, it might not have been, I can. So while it might not have been the tallest platform from which to stand on,
right?
That was definitely something, you know, actually it was maybe 4 years ago where I had been it was a huge transition for me, where I'd definitely been operating in a place where she would be talking, spinning her wheels. And a big frustration for me would be your arguments don't make sense and there's no way to pull the thread because you're just trying to win the argument. You're not trying to have a conversation.
Sure.
So it was the first time where she was saying stuff, asking for advice, not really asking. She just wanted to show what she knew. Where I was trying to say, but what about this? But are you doing this? And I was almost trying to critique her advice asking in a way. And it took me just taking a breath and being like, whoa, all of this energy, all of what she's saying, it's not even about, I don't even know what's happening, but this is all in her head. And she's just like, at a certain point, I just stopped talking and I was getting like, well, why are you looking at me like that? Oh my God, you have to look at me like that because you're saying it like this. And you think this and this is happening. And I was just like, wow, like I'm glad like I'm in my head, you know, like this is just a lot. But it was that moment where I was able to just step back and then I just asked questions. I was like, well, what do you think about this? And I don't know if I agree with that. I'm not sure. What do you think about that? So that way, it's not that I'm saying no, but I'm saying, I'm not quite sure that that makes sense to me. And while it didn't end a peaceful resolution, it was a big moment for me to be like, people have a lot of gears that are turning inside their head.
Yeah.
They pick up
They
on
spin.
things that, they pick up on things that they've programmed in as insults or compliments or whatever.
Oh yeah, I worked in a psychiatric day treatment center. Had this kid with bipolar. I ended up restraining him, and you know, by the end of all of it, everything was over, and we just like looked eye to eye at each other, and I smiled like,
yeah,
we're still friends. It's over, and boom, right in the eye. Like, and then later I found out if you smile at him, he thinks you're making fun of him. Oh, wrong.
Yep. I mean, it's funny what we learn as kids that we pick up in like those little slights, the little actions that we learn. And what is it? The do as I say, not as I do. No, I'm going to do as you do because you're the one in power and you're the one who I'm learning. That's who I want to be. So then I can say, do as I say, not as I do when I'm older.
Right. Oh, okay. So ask how, right? How does it make you feel? And how does it give you more control? And how does it best serve you and others? So when it comes to advice, ask how. I'll start that over. So when it comes to advice, ask how. Right? So how does it make you feel? How does it give you more control? How does it best serve you and others? If you're going to give advice, you get to ask yourself how. Is that what you're intending here?
Yeah, it's very important to know that when you're giving advice, how does it make you feel to be the one with that knowledge? How does it make you feel to have that expertise? How does giving that advice kind of cement your role in whatever dynamic it is? How does it actually, I think what I've loved hearing this phrase, and maybe it was used a lot prior to the Black Lives Matter movement, but it was in the Black Lives Matter movement that I heard the phrase intention aligned impact come really, really out of the blue, just really make a stand. And I think that would be my phrase for the last question you have here on the bottom of your screen. How does it best serve you and others? You may have an intention. Is it actually leading towards the impact you want? Or is it the intention that you wish created the impact you have in your head? Like, it's very important.
Deep.
I mean, I twist it some ways. But it's important to know, like, I don't just have this intention and I'm doing what I think is right because it feels good. No, this is about serving somebody else. So I need to make sure that when I'm giving this, it's answering their needs, not mine.
Yep. Because they asked you for the advice, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. And so, and then you're asking, like, how does it make you feel? Like, you drilled down in another conversation about, like, it sounded like it made you feel like the coach. It made you feel like the proud big sister, like, ha ha ha, and smarter than you, right? So checking in, like, oh, you know, how does this make me feel to be giving this advice, right? Because sometimes somebody's asking for advice and you have zero experience with what they're going through, and it makes you feel really icky,
man. Yeah,
like imposter syndrome icky. Like,
that's horrible. That's horrible when someone asks, like, they clearly are in pain and you're just like, this is just life. Like, this is just
out of my league.
I can't help you. It's not even out of your league. It's just like, sometimes there are just things out of your control. And what I want to do is I want to help you not feel bad. But sometimes feeling bad is what will prevent you from feeling worse in the future. Like, life is filled with ups and downs. And if you start saying there's no such thing as a down, I will never experience it, then you cut the platform here. And guess what? Your highs aren't as high.
Yeah.
It's just very interesting to me to think about the fact that why are we helping? Is it because we want the other person not to feel bad?
Yeah.
That's a very real drive. It's not always about, I want to feel good by stopping somebody else's pain. Right. It's not always that. Sometimes it mixes, sometimes it's balanced, but I just think it's important to be able to identify, am I leading more with this, or am I leading more with trying to help you?
Right. It reminds me of like a strategy session where, you know, you've offered to help someone with like one thing, you know, and you help them with more than that. The person leaves you thinking they're okay now, if you will, you know, and you've given them false information. So, you know, you've basically hurt them, and then you don't have a client. So you've basically hurt yourself in the process, right? So, yeah, interesting.
That's funny that you mentioned that, because one of my clients, I work with coaches for the most part, doing copywriting. Little plug. But I work with coaches for the most part. And it's very interesting looking at the different styles. And the styles that I feel are most potent are those where they don't have the answers. They don't. What they're willing to do is journey with you and explore different possibilities. And I think that is one of the key features that I found in a lot of the coaches who I've really enjoyed working with, is that if you ask them a question, they're not going to be like, oh, well, that's because of trauma and that's because of this. And I mean, this obviously happened in your childhood, blah, blah, blah. Because that leads to what you said, Linda. That leads to the patient feeling like, well, I know that the reason that I migrate towards men who are overly controlling is because my dad did this, and this is why this is. And I know that now, so I'm free. Like it's like this, and cool. Now that I know this, I guess
what am I supposed to do with
cured
it?
as I'm still withering inside, but
yeah,
I'm cured,
right?
I guess.
But
yeah. So
good.
Yeah, I think asking, or at least sitting with and taking the real time to contemplate, oh, beyond my expertise, maybe I am someone who is all about stress, and that's the science of stress. Everything's about stress. Even if I know the likely trigger of the stress for my client, I think it's important to allow that space. They ask a question, they say something, and you just go, you know, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. I would love for you what I'm wondering about is this area right here. What do you think about this? Get them to get more detailed into the different areas that are causing them problems.
Yep.
Because when they come up with their own solution, when we come up with our own solution, it's that much stronger, especially if you've had someone there building you up in learning and figuring out how you can stand on your own.
And knows your story, because sometimes people just like don't get it right because they don't.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't have that backstory. And of course, the coaches aren't going to let you go into your story either, you know, on top of it. But just to know your journey story and know your backstory, of, you know, how you ended up, what your patterns are. So, you know, you can take it like, oh, like this is a new pattern because in the past you would have reacted this way and now you're reacting this way. Why do you think that is? Right. And then they go, oh, I've really gained confidence, or, you know, they can self-talk, which is really cool too.
Yeah. Although I will say, who was Carl Roger? Oh, I hope I didn't mess that up. Was he the humanist style psychologist? I'm not quite sure, but there was one man who pioneered this very human, although it kind of irritated me when I learned about it in psych, because all he would do is you say something and then he would return that statement to you in the form of a question. And I'm like, okay, we can move the conversation forward. We can yes and this a bit more than what he was doing with his version of therapy. Because if you're just re-asking me the questions I ask you, I'm going to be like,
oh, that is a really great teaching tool though. And I was in, I had a Kumon math and reading franchise. And when the kids,
okay. I think I did that when I was younger.
Oh, okay. When the kids would come up and ask a question, I would ask, I was trained to ask them a question back. And that was so powerful.
No, it definitely is. It just knowing the place and time, right? Because if you have a full session that's all that, and they're like, no, I really don't know. So what do you really not know? Like, it's at a certain point, it's moving the conversation forward.
Oh
right?
yeah, no, that would send me to the moon.
Yeah, it was funny watching those videos.
And that really
that's-
ramps up
yeah.
a person's pain. I was just chatting actually with Jennifer Beats about that, because that really just keeps ramping up a person's pain. And instead of just, you know, grabbing hands and like the way I coach, you know, we do it together. I don't like give you a homework assignment and then you come back and I go, so why don't you have that done? You know, like we are busy, right? And women, we don't always tap into our masculine. So to have another woman come alongside, hold space for the masculine, and actually you're doing it together, and then you're splitting up. It's like, okay, I'm going to do this part. You know, they pick what their part. You know, okay, this makes no sense. This will be the easiest. You know, whatever. And then you just go off. It gets done every time. No accountability partners. Everybody's just moving forward. It's really powerful. And like, I don't know anybody who coaches like that. A hands-on coach, really? I haven't seen it yet.
It's a delicate balance. It's definitely a delicate balance, and knowing that there's no rule for it. It's just, as soon as you fade into, I know what's going on, you're going to be missing the mark, because then you're listening to your ego, you're listening to your knowledge, you're listening to what you're going to throw on top of every other person. I ran across a coach who, at first, I was really impressed by his theory and the way in which he approached the work. At a certain point, I got on a call and I was just like, oh man, you were very assumptive in knowing, like you just knew before I even asked the question. And to me, every single person is unique. So while we might have common through lines, we might have common patterns. And I do feel that we can empathize with each other even beyond different circumstances, not completely, but we can try our best. Right. I knew that he wasn't hearing me. He wasn't hearing my intention. He wasn't necessarily hearing my emphasis. He was coming in, providing me the answers, which
the guru.
They were to questions I wasn't asking.
Took the guru position.
Exactly. That was exactly it. So again, there's many different people who need many different stages of support. Some people might need the guru at a certain point. Some people might need that support and comfort and safe place. Some people might need the person who's like, that's BS, move. Like, so it's just knowing that. And you do such a great job of being able to identify, like, let's sit with this feeling right now. You're trying to run a little bit too fast. Okay, now we can transform. Now we can fuse that into a better technique.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. And so how does it best serve you and others? Like you were saying, like that coach was so not serving you. And when it doesn't serve you, it doesn't serve others, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Any more you want to say there?
I would just wrap up with, how does it best serve you and others? If it's really just, you're going to be cutting off the way I'm seeing it, the cords that connect you to the world, that connect you to people. Every time you give advice, and not only is it advice that isn't hearing their contradictions, that isn't hearing them. Yeah. You're just imposing your will onto somebody. Not even, I don't mean forcefully in terms of physical, because this was all virtual, right? This is all 2020 quarantine. Right. But
it is going to create that disconnect.
Yeah. And it's fascinating. I work most on LinkedIn. And what I found for the most part is that people are interested in conversation. They're interested in adding rather than, oh, what was it? One of my friends on LinkedIn, his name's Hugo Donat, amazing productivity coach. That's his niche. And what he said about LinkedIn is that, and I might be saying this wrong, but that it's about accountability, not being argumentative. It's additive, not argumentative. That's what it is. Okay. And I think that applies to this idea of giving advice as well, because it's not argumentative. It's not coming in conflict. Because as soon as you're starting to say you're wrong, it's not advice. It's you being right versus wrong.
Again,
so once, Exactly. So once you move into this area of, okay, this is about meeting you in your needs, in your context, with your upbringing, which is a lot. We can't get it right. We can't get it right all the time. At a minimum, just be there. Just be there, and don't try to impose your brain, your ideas on them. Give them that open space to just express whatever they want. And when you feel like talking, if you don't, like you had mentioned earlier, Linda, if you don't have that specific expertise or experience, just breathe and just be there with him. That sucks. That sucks.
Know the most healing story of my life, but I lost my father to suicide, and then I didn't cry for like a month, and my friend was in the house, and she came in like, Linda, and I'm like, the moral breath goes off, and I just was like, I can't take anymore, and I started crying, and then I didn't stop, and my friend ended up leaving because she didn't know what to do with me, and my mom ended up saying goodbye to her and then coming to me, and then she found me in my father's closet, hence my memoir. And I just forgot the smell of his clothes, and I found myself in his closet wanting to smell his clothes. And so my mom sent me to church, to a pastor whose wife had committed suicide, and we just sat, there was a couch in his office, and we just sat on the couch and said nothing. It was the most healing time I've ever had in my entire life, and I'm 64 years old. So it really had an impact. And then eventually we were just kind of bringing up fond memories and stories, and even having a few good laughs. You know, it's incredible what just like that, taking a breath, or just being together with someone in silence can be just as healing as all the words in the world.
I mean, thank you for sharing that story. And I think that that's such a perfect example of meeting someone where they're at. Like if that, what was the pastor's name? Or if that female pastor, if she had,
it wasn't female, it was a male.
Okay.
His wife had died.
Oh, gotcha. If he had come in and started being like, I know that it can feel like this, and you're probably going through this right now. One of those sort of conversations
and I'm a teenager going,
exactly. Especially if he's like, I know you're going through this. And it's like, you just met me and you didn't even ask me anything. What are you talking about?
You can't ask me anything. Oh my gosh.
But I especially find when people are in a really delicate area, like there's a lot of emotions, I found that it's better not to come in with a fix. Those emotions need to be processed first. So it's better to just resonate with someone, be like, oh man, I know I don't fully understand it, but I'm feeling it. And that does not feel good. I am sorry that you have to go through this, and just kind of being there for them. And then you can move into, well, let's examine this. Why do you think that this happened? What was this, something that had anything to do with you? Is this a pattern? Like, let's move through this. And then we can move into, okay.
Or asking if they'd like to move through this too.
Yeah,
right? Again. Yeah.
And of course, this depends on your relationship. Like if you don't know them, if this is a stranger on the street, like, of course, ask if they're okay first, ask if they want anything, because who are you to come in and just grant them this advice that you've learned is what? That would be insane. I know that I feel pretty confident in my ability to read a situation. That doesn't mean that I would know the advice for a stranger that I just met, who I don't know their family life. I don't know their mental health. I don't know anything about them.
Yeah. And we get to be careful when we do ask for advice or feedback, because if you just say, especially like I learned that as like an author, or if you've written something, to just say, can you give me feedback, to be super specific of what feedback you want. Is it finding the stupid edits? Is it asking them to take a look at the kind of the whole content editing? Is it are all the dots connected, like overall? Like, what are you really needing? Feedback is not enough words. You're gonna get hurt. You're gonna get what you don't want.
Yeah. That is such a perfect example, Linda. I mean, even as a copywriter, let's say, and I'm sure you and I both have that experience. You write something and you're like, oh, I'd just love to get your thoughts on this. And they go through and it's like, well, this didn't make sense and this didn't make sense to me and this didn't make sense. And you're like, right, you weren't my audience and I didn't tell you what I was thinking about.
Oh, yeah, that's
so
the
you
other
just,
thing. Like, do not take it to your family. Right?
No.
Oh, do you know Stephen King's book on writing? Have you
No.
Oh man, it's so good. I learned so much.
Man,
and he says, write with the door closed and then write with the door open. And what he means is he comes out and his trusted, editor, if you will, is his wife. First glance, is always his wife. And she's like, what do you mean somebody so-and-so grabbed the pistol off the mantle? Like, why was a pistol on the mantle? I mean, you'd have a rifle hanging over a fireplace, but a pistol on a mantle? Yeah, right. And he goes back, shuts the door, and writes with the door closed. Right with the door closed, right with the door open, right with the door closed.
And it's important to know who your audience is and who's going to, this is from the other side of things. When you're asking for advice, like, you got to know who you're asking and why. This advice goes both ways. The advice I'm giving to ask for advice, it goes both ways. Because if you are just searching for validation or a way out of like not knowing what to do right now, then anything that anybody else says isn't actually going to make you feel better because the work still needs to be done.
Yeah.
You still aren't going to be satisfied because they don't know your brain and the intention that you have.
Right.
But it's also because you maybe haven't sat with it enough or in the fear, in the procrastination, in the stress of it all, of the not being perfect. Mm-hmm. And so you're like, can you just tell me what to do? Can you just share your thoughts? Can you just like, what do you think I should?
Cop out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And sometimes it is one of those things where you get a mental block and it's like, it would be good to have a second pair of eyes on this to see maybe their brain.
They just say a bunch of shit and you're like, nope.
Exactly.
At least you're one step further or 3 or 4 or 5 no's further to what you really do want or what your decision really will be. Sometimes it helps.
Yeah.
I love it. Very cool. All right. So when it comes to advice, ask who. Like, who is the advice really for? Is it for you? Is it for them? Can you explain that?
Yeah. Like we've briefly mentioned a little bit. When we give advice, when someone is in emotional distress or just needs some clarity, there's a number of things that can go on. Usually it's split between 2 parties. It's either you're giving advice and that makes you feel good, and it's more about you feeling good than it is about them, or you're really tapping into them and figuring out how to help them move themselves forward, let's say. Yeah. And that makes you feel good. So in both sides, they're both going to come into play. It's just knowing what's leading, because when you're leading from, I want to feel good, it's really easy to skip past, oh, that wasn't what they needed. I wasn't actually listening to them. I think a huge key is like, are they actually giving me eye contact? Are they still, or are they fidgeting? Are they like, does it seem like they're thinking about other things? Is there like, are they already ready to speak before you've even shut your mouth? I think that all of those are little telltale signs that maybe they're not the person who might give you the most clear-minded advice, because they might be thinking a little bit more about, oh, well, that word you said just reminded me of this. And now I have a story that I'm interested in talking about. So take from that whatever advice you do, because that's what I was reminded of. So now I'm telling you my story. And it becomes about you. They don't want to, maybe they want a story, but you weren't listening enough to know. So being able to identify, am I doing this because I didn't get this advice when I was younger and I wish that I had been told X, Y, and Z, or I received this bad advice from someone, and I wish that I wanted to be the person who fixed that. So I never steer someone wrong. So I have the right advice. But the problem is, you know, the right advice that would have worked for you in that moment.
And what
so
you
while you
want
might
in that moment.
exactly,
and
what
what somebody else wants or needs in their moment.
Exactly. And so while it might feel very much connected, that you see the injustice that's happened here and you feel compelled to go and help with that injustice because it feels the exact same context, it's a little different. So that it makes it really tricky, because you can have the best of intentioned people who haven't matched their impact to it yet,
Right.
who are still more about the intention for themselves than rather all the way through.
Yeah. And so it, like, bottom line feels like that, be curious. So you get more information.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was Tamara Burke in an interview with Brene Brown, who she was a little confused by something that Brene said. It was like, that could ambiguously go to a few different sides.
Oh, okay.
And Tamara, you heard this pause where she went, tell me more. So she caught herself. She was about to have a gut reaction. And then she went, okay, well, I know Brene. Let's take this back. I was about to react instinctively. I want to hear a bit more before I make my decision on what I want to say. And it ended up opening up the conversation. She was like, I'm glad you said that, because now I understand where you're going with this and we can move forward productively.
Ooh, that's really beautiful. And again, that's that take the breath, to slow down and take that time to just check in, process. And what she did is she went to intention, right? Right?
Yes.
Yeah, I love it. Very cool. Anything else you'd like to add?
I would just say that it's also important to know that we're not going to do it 100% correct all the time. So being able to forgive yourself and know, like, that was more about me, but I'm going to move through that and remember that next time that's a good thing to learn from. I take everything as a learning experience. So, like, if you ever criticize yourself to the point where you can never think about it again, then you're limiting yourself from being able to consider it in the future.
Nice.
So just forgive yourself if you do go astray, or if you say something that doesn't quite make sense, or even if you're just trying to practice giving good advice, you might stumble a few times. Just make sure that you reconnect with the person that you were giving that advice to, and just check in to make sure they're okay.
Right. Absolutely. I love it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this, Madison.
Yeah, Linda, of course. I mean, you've created such a beautiful platform here. And these ideas, I think that we live by them, but we don't always understand them fully, and we don't always explore them, going on the curiosity train. So I'm really grateful I had the opportunity to do so with you today.
It was beautiful. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.